some people think that a trip to Gainesville isn't as tough as hosting the Gamecocks. What the H?
What the? What was he thinking?
Release the hounds.
The Dave Hooker Show.
Keep cool.
A presentation of OffTheHookSports.com.
Tougher game for the Vols, and we'll get into a little A&M and Kentucky as well. But, John, you wrote a recent column, Florida or South Carolina. If I had told you that South Carolina at home or Florida on the road, that they were even comparable, it's not that long ago, you would say that's not even close. Florida would be the tougher game. But that's debatable this year, is it not?
Yeah, I believe so. I think South Carolina, and I got a few emails on this one. I think South Carolina is a tougher game because of the matchups. And I go back to last year. Spencer Rattler, quarterback for South Carolina, versus Graham Mertz at quarterback for Florida. Graham Mertz might be the worst starting quarterback in the SEC this year.
Wow.
I mean, Spencer Rattler, I know he's been inconsistent, didn't play well first part of the season last year. But check out South Carolina's offensive line. It was one of the worst offensive lines in the country, I thought, early in the season. It got better, and things changed. Spencer Rattler, I weigh those last three games heavily. Talk about inconsistency. There was no inconsistency in those three games. Tennessee, Clemson, Notre Dame, all nationally ranked. Notre Dame beat South Carolina. It was a very close game, high-scoring game. I match up Spencer Rattler and Antoine Wells, his top receiver, who was like 11 catches for 177 yards against Tennessee last year, against Tennessee secondary. I think they can terrorize Tennessee secondary. I don't think Florida can. Florida's strength is running the ball. It has a good running game, two really good running backs, even greater depth than those top two. But its offensive line to me is mediocre. I just don't see Tennessee's strength on defense is against the run with its front seven. So I don't see it. The only reason to me to say Florida is a tougher game, it's in the swamp. Tennessee doesn't win in the swamp. It hadn't since the early 2000s. So 2003, I guess. So I can see that, but other than that, and I don't think even the swamp is as big a factor as it used to be. When Florida's rolling, the swamp is roaring. Florida's not rolling now. It's coming off a 6-7 season, and if it gets dismantled by Utah in its opening game, and I think that's a very good possibility, a lot of the fan base will kind of say, well, we need to back off this team a little bit. So to me, I could see Tennessee beating South Carolina by 4 touchdowns. But I also could see South Carolina taking that game down to the wire because of Spencer Rattler and the receiving corps.
Caleb, how much do you factor, because I've mentioned this, the whole revenge thing, and I don't think that affects it during the game. I want to be clear on that. I don't think anybody says, oh, you beat us last year. It's the middle of the second quarter. I've got to play really hard. But I do think I think you have everybody's attention from Sunday all the way through, and you'll have a great week of practice because they're going to be like, those are the guys that spoiled our chance to go to the college football playoff. Caleb, how much do you weigh the revenge factor in this game, the South Carolina game?
I do, because of what you said, the week of practice. I think Tennessee did not practice well the week of the South Carolina game last year.
Yeah, they were fighting in the locker room.
They were fighting in the locker room. And John, I wanted to get your thoughts, but Dave and I talked about this that day, the South Carolina game. If you remember, Tennessee at the time, I think it was like 5 or 4 in the college football playoff rankings, and there were a couple of things. It seemed like they controlled their own destiny, but to be sure, there were a couple of things they wanted to happen. And I think TCU was locked in a tight game that day. Ohio State was locked in a tight game that day. And I just got the vibe that Tennessee's defense spent the whole day watching those games, and it just kind of got into their head for the night game that night. And it just had them play just with a lot less aggression, I want to say. And I think that I think that combined with the bad week of practice, combined with the Jeremy Banks suspension, that's how you get the South Carolina game you got last year.
Yeah, Caleb, I don't give a whole lot of credence to the other game thing. I think players are pretty locked in on game day. I just don't think if that were the case, that would to me would be very troubling if they could be distracted that easily. I think the fact that there were some things going on with the team and Jeremy Banks episode, that kind of thing, that was more of a factor, I thought. But also, you look at that defense. You look what Anthony Richardson did to that defense. Florida lost the game, but look what Anthony passed for well over 400 yards. Look what Bryce Young did to that defense. I mean, Tennessee won because Alabama missed a field goal and Tennessee hit one, but its defense was porous in that game. So good quarterbacks with the right scheme, right approach, an aggressive offensive approach really caused problems for that secondary. And I think that's what South Carolina did. I think if South Carolina's top two running backs hadn't been injured, Tennessee would have won the game.
I will say this, though, from talking to Jacob Warren and Cooper Mason, by the way, they are on our YouTube channel. Click the like button and subscribe to get updates as to when the latest comes up. And also Celebrate 98 is on the YouTube channel. To Caleb's point, we use Tennessee practices in the morning, and that's what helped them against LSU. I don't know if it's watching games or not, but talking to those guys, they do hate night games because you sit around, especially on the road, you sit around in the hotel all day. But ultimately, let's all be frank, it was the Jeremy Banks distraction. And South Carolina played really well. It's pretty much those two things, right?
Well, yeah, I think even without the Jeremy Banks situation, the way that game unfolded, Tennessee couldn't come. I don't think you look at Tennessee didn't have Jeremy Banks for the Clemson game. It actually was better defensively because Aaron Beasley moved into that role and had the game of his life. So I put some stock in that, but I don't believe Tennessee, even with Jeremy Banks and none of that had happened, I don't think Tennessee would have won that game. Again, its secondary is a really, really bad weakness. And it's got to score a lot of points in some instances to overcome that. And it couldn't against South Carolina.
No, good point. All right, so let me go ahead, Caleb.
Sorry, I just wanted to bring this up real quick. John, I know you don't believe in Billy Napier as a game planner at all. I don't either. But do you think one thing that helps Tennessee versus South Carolina this year is I think South Carolina made the worst offensive coordinator of any team this year in the SEC, and that includes Mike Bobo at Georgia. And I say this as a Titans fan, remembering him in 2012. I have no faith in Dowell Gaines to do what he needs to do with Spencer Rattler.
Well, that's a valid point. Shane Beamer's an offensive guy too. If that's the case, then that was just a terrible hire and a step backward for a program that seemed to be gaining momentum. I want to see the offense before I really comment on that. I mean, I can see why you would raise that question. I just think if Spencer Rattler, he's one of those guys, and maybe I'm higher on him than most people are, but he's one of those guys that when he gets hot, he is just almost impossible to stop. He just gets rolling, and he was rolling at the end of the year. And maybe that won't work with a different offense coordinator, but I watched him at Oklahoma, and it was the same way. When he was on, he was really on. And again, I keep harping on this, but Tennessee's secondary, I mean, they've got we figured it out the other day. It's like 13 players who have made at least one start, and it covers about 130-something starts. Tremendous experience in the secondary. But how much better have any of those guys gotten?
No, I mean, Caleb and I have had this discussion too, John. I mean, the bottom line is it's not experience. It's just, they're not very good. I mean, it sounds mean to say, but yeah, I can go get experience doing a lot of things and do it over and over and over. My gym coach used to say back in the day, he goes, yep, effort's important, but 2 + 2 is never going to equal 5, even if you write it 1,000,000 times.
That was your gym coach?
Yeah.
There are a lot of brilliant gym coaches in this world.
It's true. A lot of them are coaching football in college. All right, so
Tennessee hired a former gym coach.
Butch Jones reference.
I mean, Jeremy Pruitt actually did coach PE. Yes.
Jeremy Pruitt is a gym coach now.
Yes. All right, so let me ask you both. Start with Caleb. Toughest game, rank them. Let's take out Alabama, Georgia. So we have Florida, South Carolina, A&M, and Kentucky as legit, I don't want to say coin flip games, but I think we would agree that they're kind of the step down, and then you get to Vanderbilt. But out of those 4 games, how would you rank them as the toughest, Caleb?
Y'all ready for this?
I'm ready.
Number one is Kentucky. That is the toughest of those 4 games. And Liam Cohen with Devin Leary. I have a lot more faith in Devin Leary than Will Levis. By the way, John, I don't know if you saw Will Levis for the Titans last weekend. I am still so angry that they drafted him that like I watch him and I'm like, you traded up for this guy. So I think they upgraded at quarterback and they upgraded at offensive coordinator. And Tennessee plays them at their place when they're coming off a bye. So Kentucky's easily the toughest game. I'm still going to go Florida second. I get all of John's points, but I think there's just a history of Tennessee and Florida that I think sometimes creeps into the players' heads. I think those mid-2010s Butch Jones years where they should have won 4 years in a row and they lost 3 of 4. And I think just the mentality of playing Florida, something causes that. Third is South Carolina. Fourth is A&M. I think Tennessee blows out A&M sleepwalking.
John, how would you rank those 4 teams?
Well, I'd flip those. I would start with Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M has a really good secondary, a really good defense overall, and has depth because it had guys hurt last year. So some of the younger players got experience. I think it has the ability to slow down Tennessee's running game without really getting its DBs involved, let them focus on coverage. I go back to the game last year with LSU. A&M's offense, it still wasn't rolling or anything, but its defense played well enough to beat LSU, and it wasn't a cliffhanger game at all. So I think Texas A&M's talent is significant. It was just really bad last year. The offense was really bad. Maybe Bobby Petrino can fix that. I don't know how their relationship will work out with Petrino and Jimbo Fisher. It's potential to be very combustible, but I just think A&M has more talent. I look at my list, and it has more talent than any of those teams. And A&M also has pulled off upsets under Jimbo Fisher against really good teams. That was the case last year against LSU. Second, I would probably go with South Carolina, again, because of the quarterbacking. And I know Kentucky has good quarterbacking too. Maybe I look at Kentucky the way Caleb looks at Florida. He just can't get past that track record, which is understandable. Tennessee's won 17 of the last 19 games in Lexington. That's a game Kentucky invariably finds a way to lose. And that's why, and I go back to last season. I know Kentucky kind of unraveled there toward the end, but that was one of the most dominating performances Tennessee had on both sides of the ball. And it's mystifying to me that it wasn't all Will Levis's fault, but I don't even remember if he played in that game. If he did, no one recognized him as an early round draft pick, I should say. So I would have to go with South Carolina, then Kentucky, and then Florida fourth. And I look at that to have Florida that low.
Wow.
I've just.
What about just if? I'm not saying this is the case, and I know Cooper's a part of the YouTube channel, but what about if you've got Cooper Mays just returning for the Florida game, which I don't think is going to be the case. I think he'll be back sooner than later, but inconsistency at the center position, would that factor in at all, John?
Oh, very much so. That's a critical position for Tennessee. Tennessee asks a lot of its center. I mean, he's the guy that really sets that pace with the offense. He's got to get up there to snap the ball in a hurry. He's got to make calls quickly, decisively. That's not an easy position to play. And so many times in college now, centers, high school centers aren't recruited highly for the most part. You get a center, you look at tackles and even guards, and you come into college and say, okay, we can move him to center. But I really think it helps to have a player like Cooper Mays, who seems to be a natural center, can handle all the mechanics of the job. And that's so important in this offense. So that would be trouble. You go down there, Joe Milton's first road game of the season. I'm not counting the one in Nashville for obvious reasons. It's a neutral site game, and Virginia, I'm sure, will bring a huge contingent of fans, maybe 800-900 people. But I just think Joe Milton would want to have Cooper Mays as his center.
Yeah, and I'm saying, let's say that they held Cooper out for the first 2 weeks to be ready for Florida. There's still some inconsistency there, but he is a very, very experienced player. I would say the toughest games, I'm with Caleb on Kentucky. I think a lot of the history, John, you brought up there, is when Tennessee had a lot more talent than Kentucky. I don't think the talent gap is that big. As far as the second toughest game, I'm going to say at Florida. South Carolina at home. I just think South Carolina already has Tennessee's attention because of what happened last year. I got a lot of respect for what South Carolina did. Don't get me wrong. And then I do think that Tennessee beats A&M.